Mindful Coach podcast. So welcome to this edition of the Mindful Coach podcast. Really excited to have you here and also to have here a special guest, Deborah Bircham. She lives in the UK because the Mindful Coach Association is truly an international organization. We had a meeting just yesterday with people from, it was Germany and the UK and Canada and the United States and then Nepal. So join us for those meetings when you join the Mindful Coach Association. She lives in the UK, and she's the founder of Live Well with Chronic Illness. She's a mindfulness teacher, naturopathic coach, and specializes in holistic support for people living with long-term health conditions and chronic pain. That's a lot of people, and these are important issues that really get in the way of people kind of being their best self. And Lord knows we need people to focus and help that particular community of folks. So I'm really happy that I ran across you, Deborah. Before we get started, I want to finish introducing you. Her work is with nutrition and lifestyle coaching, mindfulness, hypnotherapy, pain management techniques, and other styles. And one of the reasons that she's so good at this is that she herself lives with chronic pain, with an immune condition, Lyme disease, and other, associated illnesses that have been a part of her lived experience in terms of how do I become, live my best self, live my best life, given that these things are true. And now she works professionally to help other people on the same journey. So welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thanks so much. It's lovely to be here. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you.
I'm very interested in this topic. I'm, full disclosure, I'm very fortunate and privileged to be a fairly healthy person, even in my senior years, so to speak. And so I don't bear the burden that a lot of people have. I do have one chronic condition. It's not pain. It's like pretty severe chronic bilateral tinnitus. And so, when I walk in a forest, I hear sirens 24/7, basically. And it's unpleasant, but it's not painful. And so every day I'm grateful for that. And I just, I'm so, how should I say, inspired by people who do have to rise to the occasion to figure out how do I live with chronic pain and illness. And so tell us a little bit about, your journey there. Like, is the means by which you became an expert in these things part of your healing journey, or were you doing that before? Or tell us about how all that came together.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it, how that intersects. So I've lived with pain all my life. I don't remember not having pain. But I originally trained as a museum curator. I went off did my degree in ancient and medieval history. But alongside that, I was living with pain. And then about, I suppose, 10 years ago, I ended up having spinal surgery, and I decided that I really wanted to use that time to do something useful, because you're flat on your back for several weeks. Mm-hmm. So I used that time to study, and I started training to become a hypnotherapist, because at that point I was starting to feel I've been given this path, for a reason, and I've lived with pain for a reason. And so I need to try and do something with that was positive to help other people with pain. So I did the hypnotherapy specifically focusing on pain management. That was my passion. And then unfortunately, about 6 years ago, I was bitten by a tick and caught Lyme disease, and that completely sort of wiped me out. And that's a really hard journey. I don't know if any of the listeners will
I
be,
can't even imagine.
will be familiar with Lyme, but it's a tough condition, and there's not a lot of help out there. There's not a lot of understanding, and I went
So just
through
in a real nutshell, I'm sorry to interrupt, but in a real nutshell, like what are some of the key symptoms that you were struggling with Lyme disease?
Oh, see, that's the thing with Lyme. It's completely systemic. I would laugh and say every day a new and more interesting symptom would appear. So it's
no.
full body pain, it's neurological symptoms, it's twitching and jerking, complete insomnia. Tinnitus was one of my symptoms, which I still have, visual disturbances, all sorts of problems. My whole body just, went into a bit of a crisis. And it's tough.
You for filling that in.
24 hours a day. There's no respite from that. It's 24 hours a day. And, it got to the point where I was struggling, mentally as well as physically to cope with that. And the hardest thing I think people with chronic illness, not just Lyme, will probably resonate with this, is that there's not a lot of understanding. The medical profession don't really understand these conditions. They don't really know how to help someone who's got that picture of multi-systemic problems. So that was also very mentally difficult to deal with. I felt very alone, and I suddenly realized I had a bit of an epiphany that if I was going to get better, I was going to have to do that myself, and I was going to have to find the answer to that myself. And I felt so lucky that I'd already done the hypnotherapy and the mindfulness training. I'd done some training in mindfulness as well, because that really helped me to keep my head in the right place and to not disappear down the rabbit hole of, oh my goodness, what if I never get better? What is happening to me? I was trying very hard because I recognized, that whole sympathetic nervous system kicking in would not be helpful to me. So I tried very hard every day to deal with what was happening to me in a very calm way. Didn't make the symptoms better, but I think it helped me get through mentally. And so as part of that journey, I obviously connected with lots of other people living with chronic illness. I worked for a charity for a while. When I sort of got a little bit better and could work, I started working for a charity that supports people with chronic illness. And I heard that story again and again and again. And it didn't matter whether they'd got ME or MS or fibromyalgia or even cancer, or autoimmune conditions, whatever they were living with, they felt isolated, they felt alone. They weren't feeling as though they got a lot of support. No one was listening to them. They were confused about how they could help themselves. And there was also a lot of trauma there, and a lot of trauma about the illness situation that they'd gone through, that they were holding in their bodies. And I started to think, this isn't right. And, we need to do something about this. So again, I kind of felt, well, I've learned this. I've helped myself. I went on a journey of nutrition and lifestyle changes, which helped me enormously. And I suddenly began to understand that connection between what you're doing to your body and how you're living your life, and also what's going on up here, and your physical health. Not that means, I wouldn't have got Lyme disease, but it's how you can recover from that, how you can support your body to recover and, to live well with an illness. So I set up my business really with that aim in mind, to offer holistic support for people. And I'm really interested in the whole diet and lifestyle stuff and the nutrition and how to eat well. But I'm also really interested in the mind-body connection and how what we're thinking affects us on a cellular level, and how we can create that healing state using our mind. So I love using mindfulness, particularly with my clients, because it's so powerful to help them.
So how does that work whenever a person is dealing with, chronic pain, and you say, pay attention to your senses, and the first thing that happens is this, they're screaming, and pain inside their nervous system is like on fire. So, or potentially, or whatever's going on, your attention is immediately going to go to, the first thing that happens to me when I go and close my eyes is I become aware of the ringing in my ears. Then I have to go past that. So what happens for you? How does that work for people?
Yeah, that was one of the very first sort of learning points for me. I created my mindfulness for chronic illness because I trained obviously in straight mindfulness, and then I went
Mm,
off to work with people, and it became very quickly obvious that straight mindfulness practice was not, the right way for people, because when they have a lot of pain, a lot of horrible physical symptoms going on, they find it
mm-hmm,
incredibly difficult to go into the body. It heightens all of that. It makes them more aware of it, as you say, and they find it really hard to stay with that, and it's triggering for them. So I was like, okay, so I need to flip this on its head, because obviously the body scan is a very foundational practice that we'd normally learn really early on, isn't it? And to start working with the body scan. And I realized that that would not work for my client population. So
mm-hmm.
I teach other tools first. We do breath work, and we do sensory work, and a lot of them find listening, or feeling a physical sensation like their feet on the floor, and engaging with that, or visual connection. They use that, and movement as well. A lot of them find sitting still
Uh-huh.
is very stressful because it hurts. So, we do a little bit of gentle movement and bring them into it like that. And I also teach self-compassion really early on, and work really to bring those qualities of non-judgment and self-compassion in as a foundation, really, so that then as they build up to engaging with their physical sensations, they have those tools of self-compassion, and also that idea of trauma-informed mindfulness with the window of tolerance. How to gauge their
Mm-hmm.
window of tolerance. Where are they on that scale? And if today their pain is up here at a 10, then maybe that's not the thing to do for them. Sitting in with the pain
Yeah.
is the most mindful choice, and the most self-compassionate choice then is to listen to the body and say, that's not what I need right now. So I really teach
Mm-hmm.
them to listen to their bodies, to be compassionate with their bodies, and to do what they feel is right for them, and to feel free to play with it, to change it. If I'm saying to them, oh, now today's session is a body scan, and we're going to, and they're sitting there thinking, no, this is horrible, they have full permission to go to the breath, or go to a practice that works for them, or just open their
Mm-hmm.
eyes and come out of it. It's so important to recognize that, and to prepare them for it. Like you say, that it might feel worse to begin with, but if you sit with it,
Mm-hmm.
try playing with that and seeing if you can sit with it, but giving people options, and absolutely building up to that with extra skills, rather than diving straight into, oh, let's sit with the painful sensations.
Mm. Wow, there's so much in all of that. So, I mean, part of you said one of the things that lit up for me while you were speaking was the idea of people needing to bring self-compassion into this. And I had the thought, because I've heard and seen and been around, a whole wave of cultural transformation from, we're just going to do this completely scientifically to, oh, there's mind body stuff. There might be something there. And there's also, along with that mind body integration idea, sometimes this aspect of what I would call shaming people for not being healthy enough. It's kind of like, and what I mean, if you've got a chronic illness, it's almost like, well, what's wrong with you that your vibe isn't high enough, that, or you're not healthy enough. And there can be this sense, I worry about people who kind of take it on like, well, there's something wrong with me as a core individual. Do you deal with that much, where there's like this judgment kind of that lays, it's bad enough that you feel chronic pain, but then there's this judgment that gets laid on them,
Yeah,
or yourself?
absolutely. That is so huge. And I think it's something that I'm really passionate about, particularly a lot of, well, I experienced it personally myself when I was poorly. And also a lot of my clients tell me, they come to me having had therapy with other people. They've had, hypnotherapy, they've had other types of therapy. And there was, that lack of understanding, and there was that judgment. They felt that there was some element there of judgment, that you're not enlightened enough, and that this is some kind of soul journey that you're on. And also, that it's all in your head, this idea that, your pain is all in your head and it's all to do with psychological stuff.
Yeah,
And
right.
people feel,
Yeah.
yeah, people feel
I'm sorry.
really triggered by that. No, absolutely. Yeah, people are really triggered by it. I found that incredibly offensive and very, very hard. And it's something that I feel so strongly about. It's actually something I want to do in due course. I'd love to be able to do some training for other therapists in how to work safely with people who have chronic illness, so they don't do that kind of damage and they don't cause that harm. But it's something that I'm constantly aware of when I'm talking about using mindfulness and hypnotherapy to help you with your health, that people are going to think, oh, she's just going to tell me that it's all my fault and that it's all in my head and that I'm to blame because I'm not eating right, or I'm not enlightened and I'm not meditating, or, something like that. And it's so important to me that I get across that message that that's not at all what this is about, because these tools that we're using, exactly why I called my business, it's living well with chronic illness. It helps us to live well, to cope with the difficulty, because nobody can deny that living with pain and suffering is mentally and emotionally incredibly hard. And so just having these tools to help you with that is so beneficial. It's not a magic wand. It's not a cure. I'm not peddling anything like that. It's that these tools can help you to cope better with the difficulty. But the amazing thing is that there's some incredible scientific research coming out now that shows that using mindfulness actually helps physically as well. It helps on a physiological level, boosts our immune system, reduces inflammation, changes how our bodies are functioning at a cellular level even, which is incredible. That's really exciting for me, because that's really the interface between the mind-body connection. And that's lovely for people who have pain and illness, that they can help their body.
Because that's something they can do something about.
Yeah, exactly. It's empowering, and that we lose our sense of control when you become poorly. You lose that sense of having any control over what's happening to you, and the doctors are, in this position of authority, and you just feel helpless and hopeless. And I feel that these tools are a way that we can regain that power and regain that sense of control.
Well, it's so important, and particularly when you talk about this is an interesting thought or idea to explore, is what happens to people's capacity to connect to who they are. Like, what's the impact on the nervous system of you're living with this chronic illness? There's an impact on your nervous system. Then you try to say, well, we want to help you live your best life, but there's actually a neurological challenge there. That's a practical challenge, not just that other people don't face. So how do you organize around helping people deal with that unique aspect of their journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So, most of the people that I see are suffering with nervous system dysregulation, and I have experienced that as well. And a lot of it is to do with the physical illness. Lyme disease affects the nervous system, mold illness affects the nervous system, autoimmune conditions and things like mast cell activation syndrome, they're producing inflammatory cytokines. They're very neuroinflammatory. So people are dealing with a body and a nervous system that's not regulated, and it's not working in the way that you expect it to. So a lot of people, myself included, the more relaxed and calm you become, the more your heart rate goes up. It's like it becomes inverse. It's called dysautonomia, and it's, way the nervous system literally starts to dysregulate and work backwards almost. So a lot of my clients are battling with that. And there's a real lack of stress tolerance, your bandwidth for dealing with
your window is very small, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And my clients say to me, oh, I can't cope with anything. Somebody sent me an email and it sent me into a state of complete shock. And, their therapist is saying to them, oh, it's all in your head, and and they say, but I don't feel anxious, but my body is doing this crazy stuff. Yeah. And it's because they haven't got any physical bandwidth in their nervous system because of the physical.
So what do you do when you encounter someone like that? They're telling you that, like, what's your step one? for someone like
Yeah,
that?
it's got to be a dual thing because obviously the stress response and what goes on in our heads and how we're breathing and how we're thinking, that all plays into that, because if you're releasing adrenaline and cortisol and you're getting into the fight or flight, that makes it worse. So it feeds into each other. So I approach it. This is why I feel you can't do body or mind. You have to do them together because you need to address the underlying physical problem. So you've got to work on the Lyme disease, the mold illness. You've got to remove those neurotoxins out of the body in some physical way. And a lot of the work I do is around detoxing, and eliminating those toxins. Once your toxin load comes down, your nervous system can start to function properly. But at the same time, you need to then work on resetting that nervous system and feeding in those messages of calm and regulation. So, the breath work, a lot of that practice is really helpful, and just general mindfulness practice, teaching people how to center in the present moment, keep their minds in the present moment, connect with their bodies. It's got to be tiny though. A lot of my clients, they can do 30 seconds when we start. They, literally that's all they can.
30 seconds. Well, I'm going, that sounds pretty good for some some of the people I meet.
I'm clapping for them because they can manage 30 seconds of mindfulness practice and then, build up really, really slowly and help them to, learn to recognize their nervous system dysregulation, to understand what it is so they don't panic and think, what's happening to me? Because obviously that just spirals when they think, oh, this is because, my nervous system is dysregulated and it will pass. And then they have some tools that they can use to calm themselves while they're in that state, like using breath work, like using sensory practices or mindfulness practices, whatever works for them, even listening to music. Some of them, we find a way in to get them into a regulated state because music really resonates for them. So it's about giving them tools that they can use to help them and doing both, working on both the physical and the emotional and mental at the same time.
You mentioned earlier on movement, and that's something that I have a big history with as well, and has been instrumental in my growth. And so I was wondering if you could say a little bit about what kind of, how would that play into some situation? What kind of scenario, what kind of, fictional case study would it look like where movement was the thing for someone to do or to be a part of their practice?
Yeah. So when people are in this nervous system dysregulation, when they've got dysautonomia, one of the manifestations of that is they get massive adrenaline surges and they literally have too much. Well, there's a lot
too
of
much energy in their system.
The medical profession are not sure whether it's actually they're producing too much adrenaline or whether they've become hypersensitized to normal levels of adrenaline. So they feel either way, the feeling is massive adrenaline surge, and people get all the symptoms of that. So they're very agitated. They're physically unable. I'm saying, oh, sit there, and gaze at your belly button and meditate. And they can't. They physically can't. They literally can't sit down.
Are you out of your mind?
Exactly. They're like, listen, that's not going to happen. But then you see, if I'm listening to that and I'm hearing that, I'm thinking, okay, there's no point in telling them to try and do breathing and what have you, but they can move. So they can then begin to learn mindfulness and what mindfulness is by really simple. And I mean, I'm no yoga teacher and I'm no athlete, so I'm not doing, great movement practices, but very small, very simple movements like walking. They can walk mindfully. They can focus on the feeling of their feet, the sensation of them moving. They're moving their arms. Some of them, like exercising, and they have a little exercise practice that they already do. So then we say, well, do that mindfully, focus on what it really feels like to move in that exercise and what's happening in your body. And then they just begin. What we're trying to do all the time is reconnect to the body. And because when this happens, we kind of check out, we just disconnect from the body because it hurts and it's horrible and we don't want to be in our body. So the practice of mindfulness is, helping people to very, very slowly, very gently just reconnect with their body.
Yeah.
And movement can be a really nice way into that for some people.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a fabulous way to bring yourself into the moment very quickly, because the body is. I think Eckhart Tolle said it this way: the body is always in the moment. And I learned that long ago with a whole big story from an Aikido instructor. It was a very powerful lesson. So, and I'm guessing though that also when people begin to do that, connecting, that opens the door for insights and feelings to emerge about how they can be with what they can do to help themselves that didn't occur otherwise. Is that like logically what happens because that somatic connection gets wired up better?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why I love using mindfulness alongside my health coaching. And even if people are not doing formal mindfulness teaching with me, they're doing the health coaching, I always bring in a bit of mindfulness and get them, to start the sessions with just taking a few breaths and connecting into the body and just, connecting to themselves. Because if we keep doing that, and if I'm teaching them mindfulness tools, after a few sessions, they come to the call and they say, do you know what? I think it's this that I'm reacting to. I think I'm intolerant to cheese or something. And suddenly they're hearing these signals that they've never been listening
Mm.
to before. And they come out with the answer. Do you know what? I think it's this. I think I need to. And they decide what they feel they need. And when they first come to me, it's like, I don't know what's wrong with me and I don't know how to fix this. I'm totally overwhelmed, and they haven't got a clue. But gradually, once they start listening to the body and making that body connection, it's amazing that those insights just come. And they're not even aware that they're doing it. They're not consciously aware, but I'm always talking to them about listening to the body. And a lot of my clients start saying, oh, my gut instinct is, and they suddenly start to get those signals again, which is lovely. Because as I say, we kind of check out of the body and, we stop listening to it, and we kind
Sure.
of,
Yeah, of
a
course.
lot of the time, people I work with, they hate their bodies, because their bodies
Well,
have,
yeah,
yeah,
it's a source
and
of extreme discomfort for them.
yeah, exactly. And their body has let them down. Their body has failed them. Their body
Right.
has
They feel
stopped them doing
betrayed
their,
by their body. There's,
yeah,
yeah.
utterly. They've lost everything. They've lost their jobs. Some of them have lost their relationships.
Ugh,
They've lost,
just feel like
yeah,
feels my heart just sinks when you say all these things. It's like,
yeah,
yeah, it's
exactly. And
horrible.
so, understandably, they hate their bodies and they're not listening to their bodies anymore. But when we can bring in that self-compassion and that forgiveness and understand that the body is suffering, and we can start to feel compassion for it, the body starts to give us the information that we need sometimes, and that's incredibly
Hmm.
powerful.
Yeah, in the way I was trained in somatic coaching and psychotherapy. I'm not a psychotherapist, but I trained as one with Ron Kurtz from the Hakomi method, and one of the principles of that was organicity. And they what they one of and what that means is that the client knows how to heal. And what you have to do as a coach or therapist is facilitate that exploration rather than tell them what it is. And so this is very much in line with this organicity principle. And it's another version of mind body holism. And that, once you connect to your body, the mind can then integrate in ways it couldn't before. And at the same time, you need your mind to help make sense of what your body is telling you. So it's a, it's a,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
difficult path
absolutely.
to walk.
And with that whole sort of mindfulness practice, when people come to me and they are in that nervous system dysregulation and they're panicking and they're frightened, their amygdala is, on red alert.
Yeah.
And that obviously is
Yeah.
then a vicious cycle with, more pain and more suffering, and it all goes round and round. But when you can break that cycle and get people reconnected to their prefrontal cortex through mindfulness practices, that's when they can start to make good decisions. That's the other way that mindfulness helps people with illness, because people who are stuck in their amygdala and their fight or flight, they are going to be comfort eating. They're not going to want to exercise. They're going to be panicking and making poor decisions about their care and what's best
Yeah.
for them. Whereas when they're in that mindfulness state, they are then in a much better place to make wise decisions about, okay, maybe I'm going to research this specialist and find the right doctor to see. I mean, it can be as practical as that. They can, help themselves. The mindfulness, can then open a pathway to them getting actual practical help that really does help them. But when they're stuck in that, it's awful, and they're panicking, and they're not able to even think about finding the right specialist or, eating the right food. So it has practical applications as well.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, I'm so inspired by the work, because it's really hard work, because these aren't emotional wounds we're talking about, which is hard enough, but it's got physical manifestations in people's systems, and so it's not. And that makes it hard, because particularly when it's chronic, there's a sense sometimes that, oh, well, this is. I've even had this told to me a few times, like my tinnitus is basically all in my head. And if I just could get myself right, they would, magically disappear. And so there's sometimes this, like we mentioned earlier, this judgment that there's something, you're just not doing the work, and that's why you're ill.
Yeah, absolutely. It requires huge amounts of empathy and patience, and and compassion to work with people who have chronic illness. And it is frustrating, because you think, oh, we're doing this, we're on this path, and we're going to do all of these things, and then they turn up and say, I'm in a mess this week. My body has just completely crashed, and I can't do any of the things. I've not been doing my homework. I've not practiced because I have been so ill, and there's nothing that you or they can do about that. Their body has taken a hit. They've maybe, got a virus or something, or they've just had a relapse or a flare. They don't even know why. And everything is derailed. And then you're like, okay, let's just start again. Let's go back to the beginning. It's absolutely fine. We just start again. And they can have to do that repeatedly, because no one has any control over what's happening in their physical health and their illness progression.
Well, right, exactly. And so, and I think there's, I don't want to call it a silver lining, but let's just say that when you do that, every time you do it, you learn something in a newer and deeper way, typically. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So was there some point when you're in your journey, you kind of, it almost sounded like you had this epiphany at some point about the mind-body connection, but I don't know if there was a moment or if it was more like a gradual awareness in your journey. Can you say more about like what really brought that into focus? Like, oh gosh, what I do with my mind really makes a difference in the way I feel.
Yeah. So, I mean, it began way back 10 years ago when I did the hypnotherapy. That was my first epiphany. So up until that point, I had pain, and it was physical pain, and it was all, in my body, and I needed surgery, which I did. I had multiple surgeries. But about 10 years ago, I read some article by a psychotherapist, and they were talking about how the brain is involved in generating pain signals, and how you can use your brain to modify pain signals. And that was a huge light bulb moment for me. And I became fascinated by that. And I read loads of stuff about, pain and how the brain, is generating the pain. If I were to, break my leg, it would be my brain that was generating that pain. It's not all in your head, but all pain is generated by the brain. So then it makes sense that we can use the brain to change pain signaling. So that really fascinated me. And I started, getting really interested in that and studying that. But then it was while I was doing, while I was poorly with Lyme disease, it triggered this immune condition called mast cell activation syndrome for me. And I was watching a lot of summits and seminars about people talking about MCAS, and they were talking about the diet and how you control it with all different things and what it is and what the immune system is doing. But there was one lady who did an interview, and she did a talk about somatic experiencing and the work of Peter Levine. And she was a somatic experiencing therapist. And she talked about how trauma is held in the body and in the nervous system, and how that dysregulates the immune system, because the nervous system, the neurons and the mast cells in the immune system are constantly communicating with one another and signaling to one another. So if you've got trauma in your nervous system, even if that's trauma about your illness, it might
Yes.
not be that you've had adverse childhood events. It might just be that the experience of becoming sick, I mean, that is traumatic. It is a trauma. So once you've got
Yeah.
that trauma, it's then influencing how your immune system is functioning and how much inflammation you're producing. And I was totally mind blown by that, because the minute that she explained it, that we hold trauma, it's not up here, it's not, as a
It's in the
hypnotherapist,
nervous system. Uh-huh.
I was taught to help people to process trauma in their brains and to talk about it and to do, thinking techniques about trauma. But when she said trauma is held in the nervous system, I just knew that that was true. How I felt it in my nervous system. I just could feel
Sure.
that
It's
that was a
it's a much
missing
lower
piece.
level thing than a thought form, Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I could totally feel how that worked and how the nervous system was so pivotal. And I hadn't considered, I mean, I suppose most of us don't consider the nervous system as a separate entity, as an organism
Hmm.
within your body that is sick like other organs in your body. It can
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
malfunction. It's doing stuff. It's signaling all on its own. We think it's up here, don't we? We think the brain is in charge. But that was my first moment where I had an inkling that maybe the body had something to say as well. So then I went down the rabbit hole of reading
Well,
about
good.
who is
That's
the
amazing.
what is
That was
that?
a big epiphany. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
big epiphany.
absolutely. And then as soon as I started reading about that, because I already had a bit of training in mindfulness, I could see immediately how they connected, because in mindfulness, we're connecting with the
Yes.
body. And then we
Yes.
can, as you say, start to hear those signals and regulate the nervous system using mindfulness tools. And I just thought, that's the moment. That was my epiphany, really.
That's so beautiful. I love it so much because whenever you have an insight of that sort, whenever you get a glimpse into something that's true and it's true immediately, and all of a sudden, so many things just snap into place. And you can never unlearn that. It's a very definition in a way of an awakening, in the sense that you kind of come into the realization of a reality that was a mystery to you before. I love those moments so much. So thank you for sharing that, and particularly the way it
And
is.
it's been really foundational for what I do, because I suddenly understood the importance of feeding safety into the nervous system. That has become number one, priority for everyone I work with, because I can see
Absolutely.
how, when they're dysregulated, they lose that ventral vagal state, and,
Well,
and so we
right. And
need to.
particularly, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the same, that it's safety. It's all about safety. And every tool that we use, every mindfulness technique, every hypnotherapy tool that I use, ultimately, it's about getting the nervous system to feel safe so you can heal.
Yeah. And it's one thing whenever you're coaching or you're helping others, and, I teach this in the mindful coaching method, but it's like creating safety with your client, that you can be very conscious about that to create a bubble, if you will, the coaching context and relationship, and being very intentional and thoughtful about how you go about doing that. But that's one thing when it's relational, because that's about how I speak and how I show up and how I pay attention. But when it's your nervous system that is dysregulated in reference to something else that's in your body, then the part about safety is like, I'm not safe in my own skin.
Yeah.
And that's a completely different conversation that requires a very different approach. And that's the part that kind of shocks me in a way. It's kind of like, I don't trust my own nervous system. Do you deal
That
much
was
with that
huge for me.
particularly? Yeah.
Yeah, that was huge for me when I was sick and I didn't know any of this stuff. I was just lying in bed with Lyme disease, and it was the thought that was in my head was, I don't feel safe in my body. I literally, something is
Oh,
attacking me inside 24 hours
oh
a day. There
man.
is no escape from it. There's no respite. And I did
Ugh.
lose that sense of the ability to even feel safe in my body. So I totally, now I work with my clients. I mean, that is where they are a lot of the time, and it is incredibly hard. And so it is part of that self-compassion and that reconnecting to the body really gradually and really slowly to help them to reconnect to the body and feel safe in the body. And also I use hypnosis as well for that. So I have a recording of hypnosis that is talking about, being safe and feeling safe, and getting them to listen to that and to sort of reprogram that safety and connecting into their ventral vagal state, helping them to know where that is in the body and how, everybody has a thing, don't they? Whether it's the beach or whether it's the woods or somewhere they go where they feel that's their place.
Right. They can relax.
Yeah, that's their place. And getting them to really connect into that and begin to reconnect to being able to be in that state and to understand that even though they're poorly and even though all these symptoms are happening to them, within them, they still have that place. And they can access that at will. Again, it's control, isn't it? They might be stuck in bed. They might not be able to do anything. But within them, there is always that place, that memory or that imagined place. And they can take themselves there. And through that, reconnect with that sense of safety.
That's beautiful. I love that. I call it, I just came up with, I do something similar. I just had this idea the other day to call them touchstones. They're like little touchstones that you can summon these experiences at will. So I'm going to be doing some work around that. So it's really exciting to hear you say those things. Well, this work is so important. And I'm just feeling like saying, sometimes I do this is crazy, but on behalf of the world, thank you so much for this work. Because it's really important and it matters. And I'm so inspired by the work that you're doing. And also, and you're in good company here with the Mindful Coach Association, where we have, hundreds of coaches doing, courageous and inspired work. How can people find you that want to, experience what you're doing?
Yeah, so I have a website, which is www.livewellwithchronicillness.co.uk. So you can find me on there. And I also have a contact me form through there. And also you can sign up to my mailing list through there. And I make newsletters, that have tips and whatever strikes my interest or fancy at the moment. I send that out to people who might benefit. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as Live Well with Chronic Illness, so people can connect with me there and message. And I obviously share on there when I'm doing my programs and my courses and what's available. So yeah,
cool.
Love to connect.
Well, we'll be linking to all of that in the show notes. So be sure that you look up all this goodness and get involved if you're called to connect, because Deborah's doing amazing work. And I just want to say thank you once again, and it's been great having you on the show.
Thank you so much.
The Mindful Coach Podcast is a service of the Mindful Coach Association.